But let me just say, in the few minutes we have left before we end here, the question always comes up then, well, when Jesus says, this is my body, right? There's a lot of debate over whether that's symbolic or not. When Jesus says, this is my body, does Jesus mean it is his body? And we would say yes. What Jesus held in his hand, and he said, this is my body, it is exactly what he said. That is his body. And when we say those words of institution at the church service, when we hold up that host and say, this is my body, it is Jesus's body. It really is. It is not representative of Jesus's body. There's so much to say about that sentence that we could spend a whole program on that question of the words of institution. But let me just say a couple things. One is, if you're going to identify this is my body as a symbolic statement, you have to ask the question, which part of that statement is the symbol? Is it this? Most people are going to say no. Andreas Karlstadt, who was an associate of Luther, actually said yes, that Jesus, when he said, this is my body, he was pointing to himself. This is my body, given for you, and then gave bread. It was weird interpretation. Most people don't take that. So is it body? Well, it can't really be body, because he's saying my body broken for you. Like, most people recognize that when he's referencing body, he's referencing his real body because he's identifying it with what's about to happen on the cross. So the body part isn't symbolic. Most people aren't going to argue for that. So where people go and they say where there's symbolism is in the term is. They're going to say, well, is the symbolic term. Right? Is means represents. And so the question is, does is mean represents in that phrase? Does it mean represents? Well, in order to establish that, you'd have to see, one, that contextually there's a reason for not taking it literally. Right? You should basically assume what is the straightforward reading, and unless there's significant textual evidence and reason to see otherwise. And sometimes there is, because of the poetic genre that's very clear there, or there are various other clues within the text and genre and things like that to say, okay, something else is going on there. First of all, I would say I don't see that there. I don't see that there. And even when you look at the surrounding context of the Passover meal, you have the killing of the lamb and the actual eating of the lamb, not a symbol of the lamb. You have all of the Old Covenant portrayals of what becomes the Lord's Supper, of this miraculous bread from heaven, the manna that's received that Paul connects with the Lord's Supper. There is when you kill a sacrifice in the Old Testament, in the Levitical law, those sacrifices that were eaten, because not all of them were, but those that were eaten were just that, eaten. Like, not a symbol of the sacrifice. The actual sacrifice was the thing that was eaten. And the process of sacrifice involved both the killing of the sacrifice as well as the consuming of the sacrifice. It's all part of one sacrificial act. So all of that background just makes the most sense of this being understood in that context. So there's no textual evidence there, not sufficient textual evidence to see that as a kind of symbolic language. But the other thing is, we would have to see some parallel uses of symbolic language, especially within the Gospels, because it's the same authors, they're using the same Jesus explaining what he had to say. So the question is, are there parallel texts in the Gospels themselves, specifically in the mouth of Jesus? We could say otherwise too, but specifically it would be a better argument if we could find it in the words of Jesus, to say, well, does Jesus use is as represents in other places? Like, is that a common thing that Jesus does? Is that a linguistic construction he has? Well, the thing that people will point to most often is where Jesus says things like, well, I am the vine, right? I am the vine. Say, well, of course that's symbolic. We all know Jesus isn't literally a vine, which is true. Like, we're not going to say Jesus never uses figurative language. And we would say, well, because this is kind of parabolic, it's one of these I am statements, we have, and specifically because we know Jesus isn't a plant. I mean, contextually that would make no sense either. Like, we have enough textual evidence to say, like, hermeneutically, no one's going to come to the conclusion that Jesus is a plant, like literally a plant. I mean, maybe somebody does, I don't know. But most of us aren't literalists in that sense. And we're going to be like, okay, clearly there's something going on in terms of the use of symbolic language here. So we'll grant that, of course. But the question is a statement like that, is that statement parallel to this is my body? Because what you have to establish is not only that Jesus uses symbolic language, which of course he does, but that there is a precedent for using symbolic language in the same way that the Lord's Supper is supposedly symbolic language, and that is would have to be the symbolic sense. What you would have to do is find a phrase that said that where what Jesus says when he says I am or this is something, where is or am means represents. And that's not the case with I am the vine, or those other similar statements, or I am the door, these kind of things. No, I am the door. When Jesus says that, for example, he's not saying I represent the door. No, he's saying I really am the door, but what's symbolic is door, right? He really is, the entrance into the heavenly throne room of the Father, like a door would be. He really is a vine. But what does vine mean? Vine is a symbolic part of that sentence, which means life source in that instance, right? Just like vine and branches receive their life from the vine, we receive our life from him. So they're not parallel statements, and you can't find a parallel statement in the words of Jesus to this is my body, where is means represents, because that's not a figure of speech that Jesus uses. That's not what's going on in the text. So there's plenty more to say about that. We can delve into some other arguments from exegetes on that question, and there's plenty to say. There's been a lot written on that in the last 500 years.